So very good. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Alvin T. Fuller, and I stand before you not as a man born into privilege, but as someone who has learned the transformative power of hard work, integrity, and service to others. Life, as I have learned, is not about what you do with the opportunities that are given to you, but what you do with the opportunities that you have earned. I was born in Charlestown, Massachusetts in 1878. The son, and actually my parents are buried here, the son of, oh my goodness, I can't remember my mother's name all of a sudden. Laura Arabella Tufts and Alvin Bond Fuller. My early years I spent in Malden Public Schools, where I developed a certain passion for not only academics, but athletics, especially riding bicycles. I studied diligently, and later I attended the Burdett Business School. After I graduated from the Burdett Business School, I went on into enterprise, but before then, and by the tender age of 16, I had entered enough races, bicycle races that is, that I had become the New England champion of bikes. In the evenings, I would go back home, and I would repair and service and sell bicycles out of mom and dad's barn. And in the first year that I was doing in the first year that I had been doing that, I became so successful that I decided, maybe I should open my own shop. Within a year and a half, I did open a shop. It was on Cross Street in Malden, and the sign above the shop read, Alvin T. Fuller, Bicycles and Tires. We specialize in service. I had sold and repaired over 500 bicycles that year. I obviously had a passion for doing hard work. I was dedicated to it. But I was also very, very curious about what was going on in the world, especially what was happening in Europe with the automobile industry. I traveled to Europe, and that first year I returned home with 2 automobiles from France. They were the first 2 automobiles to enter the United States through the port of Boston. I wrote to my parents and I said, you know, I think the Boston store can make a go of it. I've spent a lot of money, but what I have in return, no one can take away from me. I feel as fine as silk. With the profits that I made from those first 2 automobiles, I opened up a second shop in Boston, and I specialized in selling Packards and Cadillacs. Within 20 years, I had become the most successful auto dealer in the United States with both Packards and Cadillacs. It was very exciting. I certainly loved enterprise, but I had a deeper sense of commitment, a deeper sense of service. And I was very in tune to what was going on nationally. I had admired very much a gentleman by the name of Theodore Roosevelt. And President Roosevelt encouraged me to go into public service. So in 1914, I decided to enter the race for state representative in Massachusetts, where I served 2 terms. I then, after that, served 2 terms in Congress, followed by a successful campaign to become the lieutenant governor of Massachusetts. That was 1921. Then, it was a hard-fought race against the then Boston governor, James Curley. I won the campaign to become governor of Massachusetts. That was very, very exciting to me. But again, service was so important. Service was important, so much so that I never, during my time in public office, ever cashed a payroll check for that service to my country. It was 1928 that I decided to design a central garden at our home along Ocean Boulevard behind my house. At that time, it was called Runnymede by the Sea. The garden still exists, but unfortunately, our house was torn down in 1961, a few years after my passing. Back in 1930, I enlisted the assistance of Cherry Hill Nurseries to add the rose garden to the original garden. By the way, the original garden dedicated to Viola Miller. It was 1910 when I met Viola. Viola was studying opera at the time. She was in London. She had a love for music. I certainly had a love for Packards, but together we built a love that lasted the test, or stood the test of time. We raised 4 children together: Lydia, Mary, Alvin Jr., and this strapping man standing right next to me, my son Peter, who you will hear more from in a little while. But back to the gardens. So proud of the gardens because, of course, they were done in honor of my wife. I hope you've had the chance to visit. If you haven't, they're not too far from here. The Japanese garden, there's a Japanese garden with a koi pond. What in the world would that be? I guess an airplane, that's a new thing. I'm just getting used to it. What I am also especially proud of is the fact that after my time in public service, I did go back into private enterprise, but I never forgot my commitment to giving back to society. My legacy, the legacy of my family, my son, and all those here, continues on through the Fuller Foundation and, of course, the Fuller Gardens. The Fuller Foundation supports many charities in the greater Boston area as well as the Seacoast area. In my time, or after my time in public service, the idea of giving back was so important. I have donated to, and I have had the honor and privilege of working with many hospitals, schools, and the arts, so that, again, service to others becomes what is so important for your legacy. And if I can leave you with one message, it would be this. Character matters more than circumstance. Wealth will fade. Titles, they will vanish. But your service to others, our service to our community, that lasts a lifetime. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you will do as I have done and try to leave the world a little bit better than when you found it. And on that note, I'd like to turn the presentation over to my son, Peter Fuller.
Thanks, Bubba. He's a hard act to follow. The parents you mentioned gave me the very impressive name of Peter Davenport Fuller. Davenport is so bad. What is with that?
We can talk more about that later.
I shared a zodiac tendency to become a natural nuclear. Others have similarly described me. Japan was able to shape me. In the year of 1942, I was voted the outstanding athlete of the year. I'm very proud of that. Pretty good for a person with an infirm childhood and a lot of determination. I attended Dartmouth for military officer training and served in the military in the Marine Corps during World War II. But due to a weak ankle, I was discharged too early on my point. But I picked up my studies and went to Harvard. And I excelled there at wrestling and won the Amateur Athletic Union New England Championship for wrestling. Wins, 5 losses, 30 by knockout. Later I became a manager of boxers. In 1951 I got this guy named the title against Floyd Patterson. We lost. But I did one other thing outstanding in boxing. I'd always wanted to be punched in the face by Muhammad Ali. I don't know why. He was the best of the best. So when I was 53, I got in a lot of money for that charity work. What was it? I don't remember. I had a pretty successful business life, not like my old man. I managed the family business at least like most years at Cadillacs until 1978. In 1952, I was voted the president of the Cadillac Automobile Company of Boston. I closed the dealerships, but continued to serve as the Peter Fuller Oldsmobile dealership in Watertown for several years. And there are still Fuller businesses, car care, some others, all dealing with cars and keeping them clean and rentals. So we're still into that. My adult life, I spent most of my time in Brookline, Massachusetts, and on my father's farm, the Brookline at the sea. I loved the seacoast town of Northampton, and as you might guess, I'm a storyteller. And I would take runs on the beach. Runnymede, I trained thoroughbred horses, having the most success with the dancer's image and mom's command. As you drive down Atlantic Avenue towards the beach, you'll still spot age 26 is the one who rode her. The first woman to win the triple tiara in the country. So, that was great. One of my proudest moments, however, was taken away from me in 1978. Runnymede's pride, dancer's image, was in the Kentucky Derby, and they disqualified it. So we asked for more security for our colt at Kentucky Derby's, training prior to that. We didn't get it. We tried to fill it in with our own staff, but after the race, she won. They found a metabolite of a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory in his blood and his urine, which we had known. Others were readily available to listen to me, and I was ready to tell them stories.
Do you want to start?
I will.
Yeah.
I will. I was born with the shoreline for a cradle. Mary Isabel Batchelor, then Southworth later. And from the first I understood that life can be measured in fortunes, tides, and the way a house breathes when you open the morning windows. My parents were Albert and Mary, and they were the keepers of a plain, good, welcome hotel at Little Boar's Head. This is the hotel right here. The signboards and letterheads sometimes spelled us Bachelor, B-A-C-H-E-L-D-E-R, and sometimes B-A-T-C-H-E-L-D-E-R. The C didn't care, and neither did we, so long as the bell rang true and the bread came out warm. For worry, and a busy kitchen for courage. Then the influenza in the 1917s moved like a gray veil through the town. We learned to make a chapel out of an ordinary room simply by lowering our voices. I came to know the measure of bravery by how slowly plates were set down. In 1920, my mother and I stood together and we voted. We did not make speeches, we made time. We wore our everyday dresses and our good resolve. I signed as I had always signed, with a hand that had pressed linen smooth and steadied a child on the stairs. I felt something straighten in me that had been straight all along and only now had a name. Is there anything else that Mom and Dad you would like to say?
No, thank you, daughter. That was great. I was a young man when I first paced the ragged edge of Little Boar's Head, which is over there. I had a carpenter's rule in my pocket and a taste of salt on my tongue. And my father was James Batchelor, who put the dog on his cemetery plot. And there's an important thing that not even I discovered as a historian until later, which is he died in 1869, and our hotel was built in 1868. And he was only 44 when he asked me, his son, to come to this hotel. And we built it together, and in 1 year he died. And I married my wife, M. Abby, who we're going to hear from in a sec, and then we had a daughter, Mary, and we were very lucky to live as long as we did, and the hotel stayed up until 1929, when it was torn down because the car had been invented, people weren't staying for 3 months in the summer, and it was time to move on. So here in this plot, my father and mother, other people, and then we are buried over here on this side, but then the group before us was all there. So this is, give or take, 1800s, and then bleeds into early 1800s, and then over behind you it bleeds into the 1700s. So the Batchelors were here on this head with 100 acres on the west side. The Daltons, who were there behind you, were on the east side, and the Browns were on the north side. And this is Captain David Brown's house over here. And this house and Brown family goes up there, and Atlantic Avenue didn't even exist.
past that spot right there. To get to us at Little Boar's Head, you turned left and you crossed our little river, which had 5 sawmills on it, crossed the river and went that way where it was dry because Runnymede and all that was wet. I became a man of keys and ledgers, of coal orders and linen counts. 43 rooms by the end of 1904. Keeping stories I learned from the guests, like the first slice of warm bread and how it tastes, and who preferred the heel, and who would brave a cold dip in the ocean. Lullabies. The register was filled with people's names. I have those registers. They're wonderful. It's beautiful. People came here to feel better. It was a coast. There wasn't anything happening on these short 14 miles of land. There was 6,000 acres of marsh. Everything was wet, except places like this. So when you think about this cemetery, here it's high, there it's low, and then the church is high again. And that's because there was a small rivulet that went through the middle to feed Little River. And that happens all along Atlantic Avenue, but once we build Atlantic Avenue and put a culvert underneath, we all forget how that worked. This was a strong enough river that there was 108 feet of fall, so it could drive all these things. It's no longer the strong river it was, so it's hard to tell this story. But it started all the way back up there at Route 1, near the drum place, behind the drum place, and just over a little bit on North Road. And then it came here, and so that's why the people at Hampton, the bachelors, came here, built these mills, and then they supplied the wood for the original meeting house on Town Green and for our houses up there. And I'm very lucky to still have one of those houses up there. It's right next to where the hotel was. But maybe we should go over and talk to my wife briefly.
Abby Lamprey in 1850. The salt in my lungs and housework already in my hands. The shore teaches a girl to be quick and steady. Quick to catch a sheep before the wind takes it. Steady when the kettle boils and someone needs coffee more than tea. Before I was 20, I married Albert, who had a horizon in his pocket and a plan big enough to seat a village. People spell our name 2 ways. Batchelder with a T in the family Bible. Batchelder on signboards with a D, and I learned to answer to both so long as the door stayed open. Now, when Albert said hotel, I heard house, and when he said porch, I heard welcome. That's how we shared the work from the first. He took the frame and the men on ladders, and I took the linens, the ledgers, and the steady heart of the kitchen. We opened in 1868 with new paint, borrowed chairs, and faith. Mrs. Kelly came to me then, sturdy as a chowder, and together we set a rule. Feed people the food that tastes of where they are. Fish that knew this water yesterday, berries the color of July, bread you can smell halfway up the stairs. I kept lists in a tucked-in notebook, soap, lamp wicks, the one guest who preferred the heel of the loaf, and I kept a longer list in my head. Who needed a quiet corner? Which child spooked at thunder? A hotel is a choreography of small mercies. Before dawn, I walked up the corridor, touching each doorknob lightly, checking the draft under thresholds. I straightened a rug, where a guest slipper might catch. The house tells you what it needs, if you will listen. After breakfast, I took the porch like a hostess and a watchman, matching newspapers to hands, mending a loose button, escorting a mother to the path where the wind would not tug the baby blanket. The men thought I ran the parlor and the pantry. In truth, I ran the tide of the day. The head gave us the stage, granite and glare, and then in the evening, the soft surrender of light. Children wear summer bodies here, brown-armed, rock-shore, skin-knees, salt-stung and proud. City ladies discuss discovered that sewing goes quicker if you look up between stitches. Albert would pause at the rail and breathe, and I would think, we've done a plain good thing. Not grand, never grand, but decent, honest, useful. A place that knows the difference between a bell rung for service and a bell rung for danger. We grew up in the village. Summer cottages rose along the bluff, modest at first, and then, the temptations of prosperity. Wider porches, gaudier trims. The Improvement Society gathered in our dining room on windy nights to speak of paths and lanterns, of litter and decorum, and of how to keep the head beautiful without barring anyone from loving it. I sat 2 chairs back with my sewing basket, listening and learning the old truth of neighborhoods. That beauty is a decision renewed, and a civility a habit you practice with your mouth shut as much as with it open. Newness arrived in dribs and rush-outs. First brighter lamps, then the bell-mouthed telephone, Albert holding the receiver like a seashell that might talk back. Later, the automobiles came, puffing their peculiar breath. I grumbled at the dust they made over my porch, then made peace by keeping a list book at the door and a basin for washing hands. Modernity is like the tide. You cannot forbid it. Only arrange your furniture so it does not drown you. I kept books as faithfully as I kept bedrooms. The ledger recorded rates and names in the margins. I wrote the life of the house. Mrs. S. favors the south window. The Scots boy climbs like a goat. Keep iodine at hand. Peaches are good this week, but put preserves by. The margins are where truth lives, what we noticed and what we meant to remember, whose grief required an extra pie and whose joy required a second pot of coffee. A woman's history seldom makes the newspaper. It's written in the edge of things. The monogram stitched, the pie cooled on the sill, the note slipped under a door. There were thin years, too. Sickness visited. Always an uninvited guest and always a teacher. We kept a quiet room when the fever was abroad and learned the difference between bustling and care. The Great War took some of our boys and put a sobriety on the porch taught we had not known. Then the influenza moved like a gray-about veil from town. I must have discovered how quickly the dining room can become a chapel just by lowering one's voice. We lit fewer lamps and kept the tea hot. In those days I could measure courage by how softly plates were set down. When the law of the land declared women citizens with voices equal to men's, I felt something inside me stand up that had always been standing and yet had never been named. I walked to the place where one signs, with my work-worn hands holding a pen, and I wrote as if the call was written. In the margin of the ledger, I finally admitted it was the page. I did not make speeches. I set out chairs, baked, counted, watched, and nodded when the younger ones polished their words. But in November, I stood with my sisters and did the simplest thing. I chose. It felt like setting a table for myself. Albert went ahead of me in 1923. Grief rearranges furniture. I found his pencil tucked in the ledger and the indent of his hand on a rail at the top of the stairs. And I taught myself to run the house with his steadiness and my own stubbornness braided together. Staffs, dear souls, learned to read my glance as well as they once read his whistle. Guests returned carrying their memories like well-worn threads. The house, faithful as the tide, did its work. The late 20s changed the pace of everything. People traveled further, faster. And novelty, it was expected. It explains itself. Food that makes sense in the mouth. company that does not flatter or pry. Some summers were funny. We tightened our aprons and made economies where we could. Fewer flowers in vases, but better ones. 2 kinds of pie instead of 3, and wedges cut a little more generously to say we understood. A house learns to be dignified in scarcity, so does a woman. I lived long enough to see gray in the mirror, and young girls become the sort of woman I had once needed. Capable, keen-eyed, ready to manage a crisis with a dish towel and a prayer. I taught them that hospitality is not servitude, it is stewardship. You're not less because you carry a tray. You are more because you know what to put on it and when to leave a man alone with his thoughts. I taught them to love the head the way that one loves the older, thankfully. If you ask me what endures, I will not point first to architecture. Wood ages, porches lean, names weather off signs. What endures is the pattern of attention, the wrapped shawl, the remembered preference, the door held with a hand that was held on cold things. A hotel is a complicated way to say, you are welcome, and you mean it. All my life, I practiced that sentence until it sounded like breathing.
Well, welcome to my little chat. I'm the ghost of Ogden Nash. I would say you're about to meet an international superstar, unlike the local yokels that you've been dealing with. These bachelors, lampreys, Fullers. You're standing on the whole Fuller family there, by the way. or a portion of the Fuller family that got knocked down to my area. This is my headstone with my wife Frances, Ogden Nash. My youngest daughter here with her aristocratic husband, Eberstad. My younger daughter decided to be buried in Maryland, where we spent a lot of our time outside of Baltimore. And Clarence was a family friend that took care of my affairs after I passed away. So this is our gang, and I have a script. I'm Frederick Ogden Nash, but let's just call me Ogden. And here I lie in this peaceful cemetery, close to one of my favorite places on earth, the sea at Little Boar's Head in North Hampton. I was born in Rye, but not Rye, New Hampshire, Rye, New York, 1902. And I am best remembered as an American poet and humorist. So I'll give you a taste of a verse that I think is still relevant 75 years later after I wrote it, and it has to do with the news. Back then we were listening and reading the news more than watching it, but we could watch it. I find it very difficult to enthuse over the current news. Just when you think that the outlook is so black that it can grow no blacker, it worsens. And that is why I do not like the news, because there has never been an era when so many things were going so right for so many of the wrong persons. Humor and truth and humor. I wrote it back then, and it's still the truth now. Now, I wasn't always a humorist. In fact, I tried a little of everything in my youth. I sold bonds on Wall Street, and in 2 years, I managed to sell one to my godmother, bless her. I dabbled in teaching, then advertising. In 1925, I joined Doubleday Publishing House, first in marketing and then as a manuscript reader. Some of the submissions I reviewed were so dreadful, I thought surely I can do better myself. In 1930, I truly found my voice. I wrote a little poem called Spring Comes to Murray Hill, which is inspired by the view right outside of my window at the Doubleday Publishing House. The New Yorker published it and asked for more. The next year, my first book, Hard Lines, came out. It was full of short, snappy lines like, candy is dandy, but liquor is quicker. It was a big hit, and it sold well, much beyond Massachusetts and the Fullers and sort of Northampton. And anyway. So at that point, I walked away from Doubleday Publishing to become a full-time poet. The next year, 1931, was a big year in another way. I married Frances Ryder Leonard. We had 2 daughters, Isabel and Linnell, and family life became one of my richest sources of material. I like to say I wrote by observing the little quirks about the husband that please or displease the wife, or the little quirks about the wife that please or displease the husband. It seems people enjoy laughing at their own quirks, provided you phrase them gently. And again, from my fame, I was in Hollywood and I wrote screenplays for MGM, The Firefly in 1937, The Shining Hair in 1938, The Feminine Touch in 1941. Later, I turned my pen towards children's verse, working with Walt Disney and lending words to productions like Peter and the Wolf and The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Over the years, I was honored by election to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the National Institute of Arts and Letters. Now let me tell you about a place very close to my heart, and I believe to many of us, Little Boar's Head, Northampton. We discovered New Hampshire in 1934, renting various summer houses for years before finally buying one on Atlantic Avenue in 1962. It's number 7, if you ever have a chance to drive by, on the left. Oh, that view of the ocean. I adored my daily swims. In those icy waters, never, I assure you. And I did love writing at the shore, often about family life. When my grandchildren visited, I became the babysitter, and sometimes the butt of my own jokes. For example, the rhyme, "You're only old once." The midnight chime rings loud and clear. Where are my friends of yesteryear? One's at the fights, one's watching tights, one's playing poker late at night. And me? Well, fate has made it plain, I am babysitting once again. In my later years, I was plagued by illness. Colitis, as it turned out, which eventually landed me here at only 68 years of age. I turned my pen to the subject of infirmity, and with a wink and a groan, publishing the book Bed Riddance, a posy for the indisposed. Here's one small example. The germ. A mighty creature is the germ, though much smaller than the pachyderm. His customary dwelling place is deep within the human race. His childish pride he often pleases by giving people strange diseases. Do you, dear reader, feel infirm? You probably contain a germ. Even after I passed away in 1971, a few of my works kept sneaking into print. The book I Wouldn't Have Missed It in 1975, and my final book, A Penny Saved is Impossible, and that was 1981. It seems you thanks for the applause. Was that loud enough?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. I got a tip. coming in, so I shouted.